7 days after burying her only son, Hélène was told by her daughter-in-law, "Pack your bags. You don't belong here anymore." Imagine the sting of that cruelty when grief hasn't even dried on your skin. Would you accept it, or fight back? The church in Lyon was still heavy with the perfume of white lilies. Their sweet scent clung stubbornly to the black coats of mourners who whispered their final condolences. But for Hélène Durand, the world had gone silent. Her son Julien had been her pride, her anchor. A man who had risen from kneading dough at dawn in their family bakery to running it with pride, greeting every neighbor with warmth. And now, just like that, he was gone. The marble floor beneath her feet felt cold, even through her shoes. The candles flickered like nervous breaths in the vast cathedral, and every echo of footsteps made her heart twist tighter. She sat at the front pew, hands trembling around the rosary Julien had given her years ago. Her eyes were dry, not because she hadn't cried, but because she had no tears left. Across the aisle stood Camille, Julien's widow. Beautiful, yes, but her beauty had always been of the sharp kind, like glass that could cut. She wore black lace, but her face carried no cracks of grief. Only composure, too perfect, too controlled. And in that silence, Hélène noticed something. Camille never once looked at her. Not during the mass, not as they followed the coffin out into the autumn drizzle, not even as the earth swallowed Julien whole. The silence wasn't just grief. It was rejection. After the burial, guests drifted away muttering polite promises, "We'll be in touch, Hélène," or, "Come by any time, you're not alone." But she knew the truth. Once the last handful of dirt was thrown, people returned to their lives while she was left with ruins. That evening, Hélène returned to the house she and Julien had built, brick by brick, above the bakery in View Lyon. She had cooked there, laughed there, watched her son grow into a man within those walls. But the house felt different. Not just of Julien's presence, but of welcome. Camille's heels clicked sharply on the tiled floor when Hélène entered. Her eyes, cold as the Rhone in winter, finally met hers. 7 days, Camille said, her voice flat. "It's been 7 days. You've had your mourning. But this is my home now. Julien left it to me. Pack your bags, Hélène. Tomorrow morning I want you gone." The words landed heavier than any coffin lid. Helene's fingers clutched the strap of her old handbag. For a moment she thought she hadn't heard correctly. But the chill in Camille's gaze confirmed it. Her son's death hadn't only stolen her joy, it had handed her to the mercy of a woman with no mercy to give. But what Hélène didn't know as she stood frozen in that kitchen, was that Julien had left behind more than grief. A will. A letter. And secrets that would change everything. The night was restless. Hélène sat on the edge of the small bed in the upstairs room, staring at the shadows moving across the wall. Julien's laughter still echoed faintly in her memory, the way he used to run up those very stairs with flour on his hands calling, "Maman viens goutersi." But now silence filled every corner. Silence and Camille's footsteps below, measured and sharp as though she were pacing out her new kingdom. Hélène couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes she saw Julien's coffin being lowered, the drizzle soaking her black veil. Every time she breathed she smelled the lilies, sweet and suffocating. Then came the knock. Not gentle, not hesitant. A firm, deliberate knock on her bedroom door. Helene's heart jolted. She clutched the rosary at her neck and whispered, "Yes?" The door creaked open. Camille stood there, framed in the dim hallway light. No trace of sorrow touched her face, only impatience. "You haven't packed," she said, her voice low but cutting. "I asked you this morning." Hélène blinked, her lips trembling. "Camille, where am I to go? This is my home. I built this life with Julien. The bakery downstairs, the walls around us." "This is not your home," Camille interrupted, stepping into the room. Her perfume smelled faintly of jasmine, almost mocking against the cruelty of her words. "Julien left it all to me. His wife. His family." Helene's voice cracked. "I am his family. I carried him. Raised him. Don't you dare." But Camille only smiled, a small, cold smile that made Helene's stomach turn. "Family doesn't pay the bills. Family doesn't sign the papers. Julien made his choice. And you are no longer part of it." For a moment Hélène thought she might faint. The walls seemed to tilt, the floor felt unsteady. Her entire world had narrowed into this moment. A daughter-in-law tearing away not only her son's memory but the very roof above her head. Viewers, let me ask you, if you were in Helene's place, would you beg to stay or would you leave with dignity? Tell me in the comments, because this is where opinions always clash. Helene's throat burned as she whispered, "Camille, you're cruel." Pooh. It was the only word she had strength for. But Camille didn't flinch. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Cruel? No, realistic. You'll be gone by dawn. If not, I'll have the locks changed." Then, without waiting for a reply, she shut the door with a decisive click. Hélène sat frozen, her chest rising and falling like she'd just run miles. She had nowhere to go. No plan. Only an old Peugeot parked in the street and a handful of euros in her worn purse. She looked around the room, Julien's room once filled with childhood sketches, the smell of bread still clinging faintly to the curtains. She touched the wall with her palm as though it might hold her son's warmth one last time. Tears finally broke through, hot and relentless. She whispered into the darkness, "Julien, why did you leave me to her mercy?" Outside, the bells of St. Jean Cathedral tolled midnight, their deep clang rolling across Lyon. And Hélène knew with the certainty of dawn that by morning, she would no longer have a home. But the streets of Lyon held more than loneliness. And when Hélène found herself exiled, sleeping in her car in the public square, fate was already preparing an unexpected knock at her own door, one that would change the balance of power. The morning air in Lyon carried a bite of autumn cold. The kind that seeps into your bones even when the sun tries to rise. Hélène stood in the kitchen of the house she once called her own. The smell of coffee lingered faintly from Camille's mug left on the counter, but it felt like poison in the air. She clutched a small suitcase, the same one she had used years ago when she went on holidays with Julien to the coast. Now it was reduced to her coffin of belongings. Each step she took through the rooms was a goodbye. She ran her hand along the faded wallpaper in the hallway where Julien's height had been marked in pencil every year. She paused at the living room window, remembering the nights they used to watch the Fête de Lumières together, candles flickering in the windows of every house in Lyon. But there would be no lights for her this year. Only shadows. Camille stood near the doorway, arms folded, eyes narrowed. "You've taken long enough. The taxi is waiting." The words stung. There was no warmth, no patience, only dismissal. Hélène tightened her grip on her suitcase. "I am not a stranger here, Camille. Every tile, every beam. Julien and I built this life together. Do you really throw me out like an intruder?" Camille smirked, her lips curling as if she had already won a game. "This is survival, Hélène. I suggest you learn it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Hélène felt the walls themselves pushing her out. With each step toward the door, the weight of betrayal grew heavier. She expected, foolishly, that Camille might soften at the last moment, that she might say, "Stay for Julien's sake." But no. Camille only stepped aside, letting Hélène pass with the indifference of someone shooing away a beggar. As the front door closed behind her, Hélène paused on the cobblestone street. Her Peugeot sat parked under a chestnut tree, leaves scattering across its dusty roof. She placed her suitcase in the trunk and sat behind the wheel, staring at the house one last time. Her chest heaved and finally she whispered to the empty car, "Julien, she's erasing me. Piece by piece." Viewers, let me ask you, if your daughter-in-law tried to erase you from the home you built, would you fight to stay, or leave with dignity? Tell us below. This is where opinions explode. Hélène turned the key. The engine coughed, reluctant, like it knew the road ahead would not be easy. She drove slowly through Lyon's narrow streets, the bakery windows she once visited blurring past her. Children hurried to school with satchels on their backs, couples clinked coffee cups in corner cafes. Life moved on, indifferent to her loss. But for Hélène, time had stopped. She parked at the Place Bellecour, the great square at the heart of Lyon, where the statue of Louis XIV watched silently over the city. It would be her new home. Her Peugeot, her only shelter. The seat creaked as she lay back, clutching her rosary. She closed her eyes, but behind her lids, all she saw was Camille's cold smile. And in that moment, Hélène realized something painful. Exile had begun. But nights in the square were long, cold, and merciless. And soon, whispers in the dark would push Hélène closer to despair, until an unexpected phone call shattered her silence. The first night in the Peugeot was colder than Hélène had imagined. Lyon's autumn winds cut through the metal frame, seeping in through the cracked windows. She pulled her old wool coat tighter, curling herself into the seat, listening to the hum of the city around her. The place Belcourt was alive by day but merciless at night. Street cleaners rattled past, their machines scraping the cobblestones. Youths laughed loudly on bicycles, their voices echoing in the empty square. Then silence, broken only by the occasional bark of a stray dog. Hélène tried to close her eyes, but grief wouldn't let her sleep. Every creak of the car became Julien's footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like his voice calling her name. She clutched the rosary so hard that her palms stung. By the third night her body was stiff, her back aching from the seat. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. She bought a single baguette in the morning and rationed it across 2 days, sipping water from the public fountain nearby. The bakery smells drifting from Rue de la République were torture. She watched families pass, mothers holding their children's hands. She used to be one of them. Now she was invisible. On the 5th night rain came. It lashed against the car roof like 1,000 cruel fingers. Water dripped through the worn seals of the windows, dampening her blanket. Hélène sat up, shivering, whispering into the night. Julien, how did it come to this? A taxi stopped briefly at the curb, its headlights washing over her car. Inside, a couple kissed, their laughter muffled but warm. When the car drove away, the square returned to darkness, and Hélène felt the depth of her loneliness. Viewers, imagine being forced to live in your car right after losing your child. Would you break down or fight to survive? Share your heart below. Still, despite the cold, despite the hunger, one thing kept her alive: the memory of Julien's smile. It was as if he whispered from somewhere unseen, "Hold on, Maman. You are stronger than you know." Hélène clung to that thought, unaware that the next morning would bring news that would change everything. The dawn was pale when her phone vibrated on the passenger seat. For a moment, Hélène thought she was dreaming. Who would call her now? She answered with a trembling voice. "Allô? Madame Morel?" A firm, professional tone. "This is Maître Duval, your son's lawyer. I believe we must meet. There are matters regarding Julien's estate." Hélène froze. Estate? Camille had told her nothing. She had been cast out like garbage. Yet here was a lawyer speaking as if she still mattered. "When?" she asked, her voice cracking. "This afternoon. My office, Rue de l'Hôtel de Ville. Be prompt." When the call ended, Hélène sat in stunned silence. Her heart raced with questions. What estate? What had Julien left behind? And why had Camille said nothing? She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, tangled hair, skin pale from cold nights. Yet beneath that frailty something stirred. A flicker of hope. She whispered, almost afraid to believe it. "Julien, did you think of me even after?" By midday she dressed as best as she could, smoothing her coat and brushing her hair with her fingers. The walk to the lawyer's office felt like climbing a mountain, every step weighted with fear and anticipation. As she stood before the heavy oak door engraved with Duval and Associés, her hands trembled. Inside lay answers. Perhaps salvation. Perhaps more betrayal. She pushed the door open. If you were Hélène, would you trust the lawyer? Or suspect another trap? The receptionist led her to a quiet room where files were stacked high and the air smelled of leather-bound books. "Maître Duval will see you now." Hélène inhaled sharply. She had no idea that what she was about to hear would ignite the first spark of a war between her and Camille. A war over love, betrayal, and Julien's final wishes. The will was waiting. And with it, a hidden letter that would shake the foundations of everything Camille thought she had secured. The notary's office on Rue de la République smelled of old paper and wax polish, a sober place where decisions became law. Light from a leaded window strip cut across the oak table, catching dust motes like tiny witnesses. Hélène Martin sat with her hands folded on her bag, rosary tucked inside, feeling like a woman holding a thin lifeline. Across from her, Camille, immaculate, cool, rested one elbow on the table, a posture that said she expected the world to bend for her. The notary, Maître Dupont, adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat and opened the envelope with the care of a surgeon. "We are gathered to read the last will and testament of Monsieur Julien Martin," he said. The name landed like a stone. Hélène felt it through her ribs. "To my wife, Camille, I leave the apartment in Lyon, the shared savings account and the family car. DuPont read with the indifferent cadence of procedure. Camille's features softened into triumph. She glanced at Hélène, a look that tasted like victory. Then DuPont's tone changed, or perhaps Hélène simply heard more carefully. To my mother, Hélène Martin, I bequeath full ownership of the family bakery in Belleville-sur-Saône, including all property and assets related to it. The words hung. For a heartbeat, the room was a held breath. Camille's smile crumbled into disbelief. What? She hissed. Nails rapped the wood in a staccato that sounded dangerously like a countdown. DuPont tapped the paper. This is clear, madam. The testator's wishes are explicit. This was no mere inheritance of ovens and counters. The bakery was the spine of Hélène's life. The heat of the ovens at dawn, the flour on her palms, the little bell on the door that announced neighbors like old friends. Julien had trusted her with it. Julien had trusted her to keep memory alive. Camille slammed a palm on the table. He promised me the business. He promised me we would run it together. Her voice catapulted into the room, sharp as shattering glass. If you wish to contest it, you may pursue legal means, DuPont said, hands steady. But as written, the bakery goes to Madame Hélène Martin. For the first time since the funeral, a small ember of purpose warmed something inside Hélène. But beside that ember, fear arrived. A thin, bitter fear. Camille's face tightened. This was not the look of someone who would fold quietly. Camille rose. Her departing words slithered across the lacquered table. You can have paper, Bellman. You will not keep the power. Remember that. She left in a hiss of perfume and heels. The room felt suddenly colder. The chandelier's light seemed to watch. Hélène clutched her bag, the leather creaking, and whispered like a prayer and a plan both. Julien, I will try. Then the notary handed her a small sealed envelope he'd set aside at the start, saying softly, "This was left separately, Monsieur Martin's instruction." Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was not just a note of thanks. It was a page that began with a sentence Hélène hadn't expected. A sentence that hinted at secrets hidden inside the bakery itself. If Julien's last wish caught you by surprise, hit subscribe. Don't miss the next reveal. That evening, the rented room smelled of boiled tea and damp coats. Hélène sat by the small lamp, the envelope from Maître DuPont open on her lap. The paper inside was Julien's own hurried handwriting. Maman, if you read this, I am gone. Camille is not what she seems. The bakery holds more than bread. There is a drawer beneath the ledger, and inside is a ledger of names and a key. Trust your eyes. Trust your hands. Not everyone who smiles is your friend. Julien. Hélène read it twice, then a third time until each word felt branded to her skin. A drawer beneath the ledger. A ledger of names. A key. Her mouth went dry. Her mind spun images. A hidden safe? Old notes? Julien's of truth? She folded the letter, pressing it to her chest until the paper warmed. Julien had planned for this. He had left markers. He had foreseen Camille's appetite. At the door, a knock, polite but sharp. Hélène's heart thudded. When she opened it, Camille stood framed in the hallway like an accusation in stilettos. Bonsoir, belle maman, Camille said syrupy. I hope you're not burning the midnight oil morning. Congratulations on your new responsibility. It must feel strange. Her smile had the flatness of a mask. Hélène kept the letter hidden, the paper pressed between her fingers. Good night, Camille, she managed. Camille cocked her head, feigning sympathy. If you need help running a business, let me know. After all, I did love Julien. The last phrase landed cold. When the door shut, Hélène sank to the floor and pressed the letter to her forehead. Truth waited in a bakery drawer. But who else knew? Julien's warning felt like an ember. Small but able to burn a house down. She slept poorly, mind restless with possibility. At dawn she took the train to Belleville-sur-Saône, each station pulling her closer to the bakery that smelled of the past. The shutters creaked as she pushed them open. Sunlight slanted across the display case and dust motes pirouetted in the air. Her hands found the ledger, the old leather-bound book that always lay on the counter. She pulled the drawer beneath. It stuck, protesting years of flour, dust, and disuse. Inside, nothing. For a panic-struck second she thought the drawer was empty. Then her fingers brushed wood at the back, and behind a false bottom she felt paper. A small envelope, locked with a little brass key. Her breath hitched, she remembered Julien's words. ledger of names and a key. She slid the envelope free, her pulse like a drum. It was addressed not only to her but with a single line in Julian's hand. Burn after reading, but someone had already slipped another scrap inside, folded tight, not in Julian's hand. Her fingers unfolded it. The scrap was a photograph, Camille in an embrace with a man Hélène did not recognize. And on the back, scrawled in a hurried hand, the day he paid. Keep it hidden. If you found proof of betrayal like this, would you reveal it, or use it as leverage? Comment now, fight or expose. The photograph burned in Helene's mind like a splinter she couldn't extract. Camille and a man in a half-shadow, arms wrapped, too intimate for coincidence. Was it an affair? Or something worse? A business deal? The note, the day he paid, suggested money exchanged, favors rendered. Her stomach dropped. She put the photograph back in the envelope and slid it into the pocket of her coat. The ledger and the letter she placed in a different hiding place. Secrets were weapons, and weapons needed careful hands. By mid-morning, the bell above the bakery door had already announced the slow arrival of regulars. A neighbor, Madame Gauthier, nodded, her basket heavy with apples. The ovens smelled like promise. Then the door crashed open. Camille entered as if she owned the room. Her sunglasses were gone. The eyes beneath them were ice. So, she said, voice soft and lethal. You're running the show now? How sweet. Hélène set down a tray slowly. I will keep what Julien wanted. Camille smiled, and this time it carried no warmth. You think paper will be enough to stop me? I own important people. I have lawyers. I have. She hesitated like a conductor gathering crescendo. I have ways. Pattern interrupt. She flicked a flour-dusted hand to the counter as if the gesture were a dismissal of an entire life. Helene's palms were steady despite the tremor within. This bakery is not an object to be bartered. It is memory. You will not take that from me. Camille's laugh was a blade. You think sentimental words will protect you from the cost of failure? Banks don't respect memories, Hélène. They respect contracts. She walked to the ovens, ran a fingertip along the stone as if tasting for weakness. Then, in front of a few stunned customers, Camille stepped closer and whispered, too close for courtesy. You have 1 week to prove you can run it, or I'll move in someone who can. Understand? Hélène stared, the photograph heavy in her pocket like a hot coal. The confrontation left the shop buzzing with pitying murmurs. Some customers left. Others stayed, eyes flitting between the two women, waiting like a jury. As Camille swept out, a man lingered outside, half hidden by the shadow of the alley. Hélène noticed him from the corner of her eye, a nervous frown, a cigarette stub, a camera strap at his side. Her skin prickled. Was he a passerby? A local gossip? Or a watcher placed by Camille to see which doors opened and which closed? Hélène wiped her hands on her apron, the flour smearing her fingers like a badge. She felt small and enormous all at once. Small because of money and lawyers, enormous because she now possessed the ledger, the key, and the photograph. The man in the shadow flicked his cigarette and walked toward the back in trance. The very alley where years before Julien had hidden a small safety deposit box. He carried something in his coat that glinted like a threat. The shutters creaked as Hélène pushed them upward, morning air rushing into the darkened bakery like a first breath after drowning. Dust rose in swirls, catching the golden light from the square of Belleville-sur-Saône. The familiar smell of old flour, yeast, and wooden counters wrapped her in memory. For 2 weeks the ovens had been cold. The silence was almost unbearable, but today Hélène struck a match. Fire licked the iron belly of the oven, humming back to life. She whispered to herself, Julien, we're back. Villagers paused outside, drawn by the sound of the bell as she propped open the door. Madame Gauthier entered first, her cane tapping the tiles. Ah, Madame Martin, it feels right again. Bread smells like family, non? Hélène smiled, though her eyes glistened. She worked the dough with practiced hands, flour clinging to her skin like old loyalty. Customers trickled in, whispers spreading that the widow had reopened. But then the room shifted. The door opened sharply and Camille entered in her expensive coat, sunglasses perched like a shield. Conversations dropped to silence. Well, Camille said, surveying the shelves. A sentimental resurrection. But how long will you last, Belle-Maman, without me? Gasps murmured through the crowd. Camille's voice was silk-threaded with venom. She leaned close enough for only Hélène to hear. Your customers may smile, but I know the debts Julien left. I know the cracks in this place. One push and it all collapses. Helene's heart pounded, but she set a warm baguette on the counter and spoke softly for all to hear. This bakery is more than flour and debts. It is roots. Julien wanted it alive, and alive it will stay. The crowd applauded gently, solidarity filling the air. But Camille's lips curved into a chilling smile, her eyes promising something darker. She turned to leave but dropped a final sentence at the door. Enjoy your applause, Hélène. It will sound different when the truth comes out. A folded piece of paper fell from Camille's pocket as she left. Hélène picked it up after the crowd dispersed. It was a receipt from a luxury hotel in Lyon, dated only 3 days before Julien's funeral. Would you trust Camille's words, or see them as empty threats? Comment below. The bakery became both sanctuary and battlefield. Each morning Hélène shaped loaves, her hands steady but her mind racing. Each night Camille launched quiet attacks, spreading rumors, whispering in officials' ears, hinting the bakery couldn't survive. Customers confided, Camille says the ovens aren't up to code. Or, she's telling people you plan to sell. Lies multiplied like mold in damp corners. Still the bell rang. Hélène served bread with a smile, though fear coiled in her chest. One evening, after sweeping the floor, she checked the hidden drawer again. The photograph was still there, the strange man's face staring at her. Who was he? And what was the payment? As she locked up, the glass rattled. A stone had been thrown against the window. She rushed outside, but the square was empty, shadows long and still. On the ground, tucked beneath the stone, was a note scrawled in blocky handwriting. Stop digging or you'll lose more than bread. Her breath caught. This wasn't just Camille's cruelty. Someone else was pulling strings. The next morning, a man sat at the cafe terrace opposite the bakery, pretending to read. Same camera strap, same watchful eyes she'd noticed before. Hélène poured coffee, pretending not to notice, but her pulse quickened with each click of his lighter. Camille's war was no longer silent. It was a siege, pressing from all sides. When Hélène returned inside, flour dust on her apron, the back door was ajar. Someone had already been inside the bakery that morning. Would you fight back openly or wait and gather proof? Tell us below. By the third day of the man's surveillance, Helene's nerves frayed. She decided to confront him. Crossing the square, apron still tied, she asked sharply, "Why do you watch my bakery?" The man looked up startled. Then his expression softened. "Madame Martin? My name is Luc Morel. I'm not your enemy." He produced a card. Private Investigations Lyon. "Why?" she asked, gripping the card like a weapon. "I was hired months ago," Luc said quietly. "By Julien. He wanted me to watch Camille." Helene's knees weakened, she sat across from him, desperate. What did he suspect? Luc leaned closer, his voice barely above the cafe's clatter. "Your son believed Camille was funneling money. Meetings with a man at Hotel de Lyon, envelopes exchanged. He didn't trust her. He planned to confront her, but then..." Luc trailed off. Helene's chest tightened. "But then he died." Luc nodded gravely. "I have photographs, records. But there's more. A name Julien circled in his notes. Delattre. Do you know it?" Hélène shook her head. The name felt foreign, dangerous. Luc slid a small photograph across the table. The same man from Helene's hidden photo. "This is Marc Delattre. Businessman. Known for money laundering. Camille met him twice a week. Always cash." The world seemed to tilt. Julien had known, Julien had tried to protect her, and now it was her battle. But Luc wasn't finished. "One last thing. Camille doesn't know Julien left me copies. If she discovers we're talking, she'll come after us both. Be ready." Hélène gripped the photo, its edges cutting into her palm. She had an ally but also more enemies than she'd realized. That evening, when Hélène returned to the bakery, the oven fire had been left burning. On the counter lay a single fresh croissant, but she hadn't baked it. The croissant sat perfectly golden on the counter, its buttery scent too fresh to ignore. Helene's stomach twisted. Someone had been inside her locked bakery, using her own oven as a message. She lifted the pastry. Underneath, scorched into the wooden surface, were initials burned into the grain. M.D. Marc Delattre. Her pulse hammered. Camille's dangerous associate was no longer a name whispered in notes. He had touched her bakery, her sanctuary. The bell above the door rang suddenly. Luke stepped in, his eyes widening at the sight. "So he's warned you too," he muttered. "What does he want from me?" Hélène asked, voice breaking. "Not you. Julian's inheritance. If Camille promised it to him, you're in the way." The air grew heavy. She thought of the will the lawyer had hinted at, the one Camille desperately wanted to bury. Luke glanced out the window. "We need proof. Tomorrow, Delattre meets Camille at Hotel de Lyon. If we catch them together, it's over." Fear coiled inside her, but so did resolve. Julien had tried to expose this. Now it was her fight. That night, as Hélène locked the bakery, she found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a single photograph: Camille and Delattre kissing passionately. Would you confront Camille now or wait to trap her? The Hotel de Lyon's chandeliers glittered as Hélène slipped inside, Luke close behind. They blended into the crowd of polished businessmen and elegant women. From the mezzanine she saw them: Camille and Marc Delattre seated in a private alcove, champagne glasses clinking. Camille leaned forward, her hand brushing his cheek with a lover's tenderness. The photograph hadn't lied. "Listen carefully," Luke whispered, holding up a small recorder. Camille's voice carried just enough to reach them. "With the will sealed, everything shifts. Once I secure the deed, the bakery is finished. You'll get your share." Delattre smirked. "And the old woman?" Camille's eyes narrowed. "She won't survive the winter in that drafty shop. Let her cling to her ghosts. Soon she'll be forgotten." Helene's heart pounded with rage. Every word sliced deeper. Camille had not only betrayed Julien in life, but sought to erase his memory. Luke whispered, "We have what we need." But as they turned to leave, Camille's gaze flicked upward. For one fleeting second their eyes locked. Hélène froze, the air thick with danger. Camille's smile curved like a blade. She leaned to Delattre, murmuring something. He looked up too. Their secret meeting was no longer secret. As Hélène and Luke rushed for the exit, two men in black suits moved to block the doors. "If you were Hélène, would you run or fight?" They escaped only thanks to Luke's quick diversion, pulling the fire alarm. Chaos erupted, and in the smoke-filled lobby Hélène slipped away. Back at the bakery, shaken but determined, she searched Julien's belongings once more. Beneath a false bottom in his desk she found it. A letter sealed in his handwriting. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax. "Maman, if you are reading this, I fear Camille has betrayed me. She meets Marc Delattre in secret. I've gathered evidence, but I fear I won't live to use it. Know this, I've changed my will. The bakery, the house, everything, it is yours. Protect our name. Do not trust Camille." Tears blurred the ink. Julien had known. He had left her not only his legacy but a warning. At that moment the bakery bell rang. Camille entered, her smile sharp. "You've been busy, belle-maman. I hear you've made new friends in Lyon." Hélène folded the letter, slipping it into her apron. "Julien saw you, Camille. He knew. And now so do I." Camille's eyes flickered, but her voice was calm. "Careful. Proof means nothing if you don't live long enough to use it." Camille set a small vial on the counter, a clear liquid inside. She whispered, "One sip in your morning coffee and no one would question it." What do you think Camille brought in that vial? Dawn broke over Croix-Rousse, the streets painted gold. Hélène stood behind her counter, letter in her apron, Luke hidden nearby with his camera. Today it ended. Camille arrived, poised, her heels clicking like gunshots against the tiles. Delattre lingered at the door, his presence radiating menace. "Sign the bakery over," Camille demanded, slamming papers onto the counter. "Do it and you might live to see spring." Hélène met her gaze, unflinching. "Julien left everything to me. I won't betray him." Delattre stepped forward, but Luke emerged, snapping photographs. "Smile for the camera. Fraud, extortion, attempted murder. It all adds up." Camille's mask cracked. She lunged for the vial, but Hélène intercepted her, the glass shattering on the floor. The sharp scent of poison filled the bakery. Gasps echoed from villagers gathering at the door. Madame Gauthier cried out, "Enough, Camille. We see you now." The weight of witnesses, the evidence, the photographs, everything collapsed around her. Camille screamed, "This was supposed to be mine." But gendarmes, summoned by Luke's call, stormed in, seizing her wrists. Delattre fled into the crowd, but Luke's camera caught every frame. He wouldn't vanish for long. Hélène sagged against the counter, tears streaming. The bakery stood, scarred but alive. Julien's legacy was safe. She looked at the villagers, their faces glowing with pride. "Bread is memory," she whispered. "And memory cannot be stolen." The crowd applauded, their voices lifting the bakery higher than it had ever stood. As Camille was dragged away, she spat a final promise. "This isn't over, Hélène. De Lettre will finish what I started." Do you think Camille will return, or has Hélène finally won?